how I met Lindsey was I actually read the sensory book and I wrote you a fan letter, which I mean, I think it was the first and only fan letter I think I've ever written.
It's kind of amazing. And I felt the same way about you. And then I saw her walking like on Park Avenue. I was in a taxi and I was like, that's Dawn Prince-Hughes. I know it. Tracked each other down on Facebook and the rest is history. I was working as a writer for many years and I was writing, I thought, oh, I'd write books and they'd be fabulous and publish poetry and what a beautiful New York City life. Well, I was waiting on tables and writing a lot of advertising and junk mail and the stuff that you look at and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't need this crap, and you throw it out. So after about 15 years of that, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm so bored. I can't imagine doing this for one more minute. And went back to school and became an occupational therapist. I had my tuition at NYU paid for by the New York City public school system, which was great because who can afford graduate school? It's not easy. And started working in the schools and started coming across these kids, some of them on the spectrum, many not. Kids are all over the place and, I'm not so interested in labels at a young age, although I know the value of it now. And I was like, oh gosh, all of them have sensory issues. And why am I noticing these sensory issues? Well, I have sensory issues myself. So I started exploring that and I had gotten one, I think 2-hour lecture on sensory processing when I was in grad school, which is not a whole lot. And I didn't understand how it worked. So I've always been somebody who learns by writing. I'm much better at, Dawn wrote in Songs of the Gorilla Nation, spoken, I think it's going to be a paraphrase, spoken English is my second language. My first language is writing, and I'm the same way. And that's when I knew I connected with this human person behind this book. It was with that sentence. So I had a parent of a child that I was working with through early intervention. She had a background as a writer, and her son had lots of sensory processing difficulties, and she suggested that we write a book together. And I was like, great, let's do it. And I learned about this stuff through writing, through research, through speaking with people on the spectrum. At that time, there was little written by adults, autistic adults. There was Dawn's book. There was Temple Grandin's book. There was Jesse Park's mother's books. There were a couple of resources. A lot of it was through talking, and wrote Raising a Sensory Smart Child. And then a couple of years later wrote another one, Sensory Processing Challenges. This one is the more academic of the two books. I wouldn't call it academic though. So that's how the books came about. And it's interesting, like I had to quit being a writer in order to publish books, write and publish books. Like you never know where your path is going to take you. So that it's still helping people at this stage is amazing as I start to think about revising it and updating it for the 20th anniversary edition. That's my origin story for this stuff. So I had some ideas as I was brainstorming, like, what do I do here? What is the most useful? I think I'm going to talk about my practice a little bit, and then I'm going to touch on some of the sensory areas and find out perhaps what's up with all of you in these areas and talk about that, talk about some strategies that I've learned that have been really effective with my autistic clients. I never call them patients. It's collaboration always, whether or not someone is speaking or non-speaking, it's always a collaboration. And I worked in private practice and started off with really little kids with developmental delays and like maybe this, maybe that. You often couldn't tell, what's going on with the little itty bitty ones, and the little ones grow up. So the children and families I was working with were getting increasingly older, and the practice expanded. Finally, I now work with people ages 18 months. My oldest client right now is 53 years old. So it's a real range, of some developmental delays, autistic people, some people with some physical disabilities. So it's very varied. So what seems to cut across all of these different clients, all these different people, all these different ages are these sensory sensitivities that can make life really difficult and really uncomfortable. We talk about sensory hypersensitivity, and those are the ones we're most familiar with. Everything is like comes in too loudly. It can be sound, absolutely, certain frequencies of sound, but it's also touch. Touch is like too unexpected touch, light touch, really uncomfortable. Smell, taste, all these different movement, all these different sensitivities. So there's that hypersensitivity, and I'm sure we all have some of those. I sure do. And then hyposensitivity, undersensitivity, right? Takes a lot of input. It's really hard, to get yourself up and moving. And so there's that hyposensitivity. I think most of us are a mix. It's like a mixing board. I saw something on the internet I thought was brilliant. It's like, I applied to sensory. I think it was in regards to autism, but the sensory piece of autism, or, is being more like a sound mixing board. It's like it's up on certain channels and then it's down, and it's constantly moving around to get everything tuned in the right way. Not the right way, because that's judgmental, but in a comfortable way. So I want to add that, not everybody with even significant sensory processing challenges is autistic. We see these sensory issues in a lot of different people with a lot of different things going on. Prematurity, we know there's a correlation. There are all sorts of correlations, causations. I'm not even going to go there. But we know that basically all people who are autistic have some degree of sensory challenge, perhaps the most significant of all. So, just know sometimes I'm going to be talking about people who maybe wouldn't qualify for that diagnosis when I'm talking about the sensory piece. So what I wanted to do with my research, as an occupational therapist, I could do research. It's like, okay, someone is sensitive to sound. Well, I can do my academic research within my little world. And here's what I do as a therapist to help. That's all very nice if you have access to a knowledgeable, caring, compassionate therapist. But in most parts of the world, and even, in a metro area like New York, there's not a lot of people who really have this toolkit that can help. So that was a big impetus behind writing Raising a Sensory Smart Child, because like a third of it is like strategies. Here's what you can do. Toothbrushing is really uncomfortable for you. Try this, try this, try this. So I'm all about strategies, and, now I guess the term that people use is hacks, right? It's not my favorite word because that sounds like life is easy. You can just use this hack. But I like to call them tricks. And the kids I work with really love that. It's like, I'm not your therapist. I'm just going to teach you tricks. And they're like, all right, tricks I like. So I've got a lot of tricks in the different sensory areas. So I want to share some of them with you today. But before I do that, I want to see if anyone has a question. I don't want to just be talking.
I was just going to say that I had to search out a graduate school outside the United States because back in the day I couldn't find anybody to accommodate my needs. So yeah, that's a reality for people.
Right. I'm hearing this from so many people. And I think that for younger people, not that we're so old, some of us, but like for the little ones in the metro areas, I think there are more and more resources available, whether or not they're covered by insurance. I mean, that's why I wrote the second book, because I wanted, the psychologists out there. It's kind of every writer's dream to open up email and get an email from a publishing company asking me if I would be willing to write a book. But I got that kind of email from W.W. Norton's mental health academic publisher. They're like, we love your book, Raising a Sensory Smart Child. Would you write one for our audience, which is the mental health clinicians, because they just don't know about it. So I'm also wondering if, I think it's increasingly possible, certainly for children, but definitely for adults, not definitely, in some cases for adults too, to get someone who can diagnose them, after all these years of learning to mask. And I'm thinking like, well, maybe you can get the diagnosis. We know the young ones can get all kinds of services if they have the diagnosis. But one of the problems I see is the services, you all know, and we don't have to go into the whole thing, but it's going to be ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. Talk about what the occupational therapist or OT can do to help. Anytime I see a behavior, behavior, it's like the tip of the iceberg. It's like, that's what we can observe. Oh, the person is banging their head. It's like, all right, they're banging their head. Fine. What's underneath the surface? What is driving the behavior? What is this massive hunk of iceberg under the surface that needs to be addressed? And I always start with, when I start to work with a new person, I don't care if it's a kid or a teenager or an adult or even an infant, it's like, all right, there's this outward thing we can see. I understand what it is, I see what it is. The parents always want me to like make it stop. That's always the thing. Can you stop it? It's like, I'm gonna understand it. That's my goal, is to understand it, and for you to understand it, because then we can start to help. Is there anything medical? First layer is what's going on medically. Is the person in pain? Do they have a headache? Do they have a toothache? Do they have a stomach ache? Do they have a bladder infection, seizures? What's going on? So there's always first that layer. And then I'm like, all right, what's going on at the next level is neurological. What's going on there? Is the person, we really start to pull it apart and analyze what's going on from a sensory perspective. And then I can help with the auditory sensitivities who here has an auditory sensitivity? I think it's pretty common. Yeah. So I'll give you a quick thing about the auditory piece. Most people generally start to hear at 0 to 15 decibels of sound. Some people can hear at 0 decibels of sound, or even all the way down to negative 15 decibels of sound. That's a lot of sound. And we can call that hyperacusis. We can call it auditory hypersensitivity, but it's a lot of sound. Temple Grandin, a lot of my initial stuff from Temple, and she wrote the foreword for my first book. She talked about how her mom took her to the audiologist and got her a hearing test, and they said, your hearing's fine. She later learned that she hears at like negative 15 decibels of sound. And what happens if you're hearing so much stuff? Your system, your auditory system, your psyche is just filled with noise. And how do you learn how to pay attention to what's most salient, most important for you? And how do you learn how to filter out the stuff that's not as important? It's very difficult. When someone is able to do that, that's good. It's functional, more functional, but it's also really draining and exhausting in terms of energy on all levels. So that's just one piece of the hearing puzzle. There's also the frequencies of sound. I think, Jean, you had mentioned sensitivity to certain frequencies. Yeah. I'm really uncomfortable with very high, perky voices. Fortunately, my voice is pretty low, and kids tend to be kind of reassured by my lower voices, I've learned. That's a comfort for them. Squeaky sounds, electronic appliances that hum is very hard. So there's that piece. Some people also have difficulty with directionality of sound. Sound is like a really complex sensory thing because it travels through space in a certain direction. People who aren't the best at figuring out where a sound is coming from, it's like it's suddenly on them and on top of them, and it becomes an existential threat. So that's all, it's pretty problematic. And then, of course, there's volume. But I'm actually finding my autistic friends and clients aren't as distressed by volume as the other pieces. I think even a lot of kids I work with are like, oh yeah, it's a siren, it's police, it's not a problem. But like a squeaky voice, it's like, whoa, it's interesting, right? On the one hand, it's part of how your brain and your body work. So it's having that knowledge. And of course, that fight or flight or freeze, which is what personally happens to me, is I'll start to freeze up. I've had clients who moved out of the city and they're like, oh, I seem to be all better. So, in terms of what we can do, number one, when you have those, reactions, they're defensive, protective, self-protective reactions, like, well, what is this? If we also recognize that there's a chemical thing that happens, right? A cascade of chemical, hormonal things happen. So it becomes, there's cortisol and adrenaline starts coursing through your body. And it's like, the thing is gone. Why am I not I'm doing all my deep breathing. Why am I not feeling great right away? It's like getting those chemicals to disperse is, ABA can't get rid of those chemicals in your body.
Um, I live with a very noisy audiophile. And so I have noise canceling headphones, and I always have earplugs in my pocket that are really, really good at drowning out sound, because for a person, who's hard of hearing and who hears like really loud noises, who uses sound to create their comfort zone, which absolutely blows me out of the water. So I've learned how to really control my sound environment in what can be a very unfriendly, but they have really, really great noise canceling headphones and earplugs. I mean, I always have them with me, so I can go almost anywhere and be in any kind of really adverse environment and just pop them in. I look for the very best earplugs that really block a lot of sound. And if I need to talk to people, I'll put in earplugs that I can hear them, but it takes the high pitchedness out of the sounds getting through, so that I have more of a comfort zone. And I find that very manageable.
Yeah, I think that's really brilliant. And there are there's a couple of different kinds of earplugs out there, aren't there? There are ones you just stick in that just kind of dampen everything, all frequencies of sound. There are other ones called they're hi-fi, like Vibes earplugs are hi-fi, so that you put them in and it lets all the frequencies pass through, but at a lower level. Then there are ones you can get from an audiologist that the audiologist would specially program if you have strong sensitivities to a certain frequency. She can really take that one frequency and lower, thinking about that soundboard, really lower the volume on that frequency so that you can get more comfortable sound into your ears. The one thing I want to add about the earplugs and the sound canceling headphones is don't wear them all day. I have seen people, what happens if you protect your ears, and in England they're called ear defenders, which I like so much. But if you wear, so I use that term now, if you're wearing the ear defenders all day long and then you take them off, the sound is going to be worse than ever. So I think it's really important to save them for the really bad times, the really rough times. And I bet you do that. For the subway rides, for fireworks, for walking past a construction site, whatever it is for you, is the one thing I wanted to add. So, with something like the auditory, so there's like investigate what's going on, if there's anything medically. I became aware that I was having increased sound sensitivity, so I went to an audiologist, and I have some hearing loss and things going on with me. It was important to do that. What happens if you have some hearing loss is other parts of your auditory system compensate, so you end up becoming hypersensitive that way. Lovely. So you're going to investigate what's going on. You're going to protect yourself, which is what the earplugs and the noise canceling headphones. And I agree on the quality being important. And then you want to try to build the skills, if possible, the underlying skills. And one of the things that I love to do with clients of all ages is something called a therapeutic listening program. And that's listening to specially engineered music over headphones. ideally twice a day. And what this music does is it takes sound waves and it bends them, it elongates them. So like a high frequency sound wave, it would like lengthen it, so it gives your auditory system more time to process what it is. And it's also highly controllable. It's not a surprise, it's under your control. You get to do something you love, like maybe coloring while you're listening, or something that's comforting for you. So it's like all these things. I'm a big believer in compensation, but I also, as an OT, I want to build the skills too. I'm wondering, can I recommend something to try as an experiment if you haven't tried it, which is listening to brown noise. Okay, we all know about white noise. It's that like, it's a very bright, kind of white sound. Brown noise is sort of a dimmer, lower frequency noise. I've been reading that can be very helpful for ringing in the ears. And you can find that, actually, you can find 8 hours worth of it on YouTube. And that might be something just to try.
I was just thinking about, I have a lot of synesthesia, and I've realized just lately how I use vision to process sound. So I'm absolutely over the moon about things like Zoom, because if I have to talk on the phone without seeing somebody, forget it. In fact, I was recently sent to collections because I don't answer my my voicemails anymore. It wasn't a money problem. I can't listen without seeing anymore. And the older I get and the less energy I have, the more I realize how much I've used different senses to compensate over a lifetime.
We can use these different sensory modalities to help make sense of the world. Some people are really good listeners, really good visually, but I think a lot of it is multisensory. And for you, the visual and the auditory working together, absolutely. One of the things that I would love to bring up with all of you, because I think it's so interesting. We're all kind of familiar with these hypersensitivities, but there's a sensory system that I didn't become aware of until relatively recently. I've been an OT for 24 years now, which is a little shocking, but I still feel like I'm new and just learning and just becoming competent, and then finding things. I'm like, I don't know anything about this. It's kind of wonderful, but it's called interoception. And that is how we sense the condition of our body, how we sense our heartbeat, our hunger, do we need to use the bathroom? And it's largely out of our conscious being until there's a problem. And I was having a session with an adult client, wonderful person, very recently diagnosed, and she really wasn't experiencing the world in the same way that other people were. It was using terms like weird on herself. And she related this story. She was going back to graduate school. She bought all of her school supplies and put them in her backpack and, went to walk home from the art supply store, and became aware that she was becoming very angry. And the more she walked, the angrier she was getting, until she said she had kind of a meltdown on the street. And, people are looking at her and are weird. No one asked, are you okay? Can I help you? Which is, really a shame. And we talked about, what happened. She's like, I don't know why I got so angry. And we talked about how many school supplies she had bought. And it sounds like she bought really heavy things, and she was lugging these heavy things on her back, and it was warm out and kind of humid. And she also had things in her arms. And as we talked about it, I said, oh my goodness, it must have been really heavy. You must have been, getting really tired and your back hurt and your body didn't feel good. And she's like, that was it. That was it. But I didn't know it. And I didn't know why I was getting angry. She's like, I don't know. What am I supposed to do in a situation like that? I was like, okay, well, you take a break for starters. You stop, you put some stuff down, you take a break, think about, we've gotten to the nitty gritty. Could you catch a bus? What could you do? Could you maybe leave some of the things at the store and like pick it up at a later date so you're not carrying so much heavy stuff? And I've really been thinking about that. Like sometimes we'll feel things really strongly and we don't know why. And yes, there are all these emotional undercurrents that we all have as complex, sensitive human beings. But sometimes it's because our body is telling us things that we're not consciously aware of.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up, this is so complicated, but I'm really convinced that bullying had a huge impact on my interoception. I feel like the painful physical abuse and the humiliation that we've all been through as autistic or neuroexpansive people, you start to shut down your needs. And so I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about dissociation versus just, I guess, organically generated poor proprioception or interoception.
I think you just hit it right on the head, or whatever you want to say. You just articulated it. They are kind of separate. I have to think about this. I mean, I guess trauma, we know that trauma changes our nervous system. We start to shut down. There's a whole lot more of that freezing that happens. You go into survival mode, right? So, and when you're in survival mode, you're not that aware of your body processes. You're just ready to run, to go outrun the tigers and, disappear behind the bushes to get away from, the bear or whatever. So I can see that there's a connection. I don't, have any studies at the ready to talk about that stuff, but it makes sense, doesn't it? That when you've been traumatized, you just sort of separate out your body and your brain to some extent. So I think the healing happens when you reintegrate a lot of this. You and I have talked about the value and the beauty of movement for getting that flow back into your body. An area I've been looking at a lot is the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body. And it goes, up into the brain, it goes down into your lungs and your stomach. It's like getting that vagus nerve working optimally through breathing and these very somatic based approaches seems to be the way into that. Like there's a reason why we do deep breathing. It's not just because it's a good idea and it feels good. It actually changes our neurology. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing that you see that in your clients frequently.
Yeah. Yep. And it's funny because I'm just thinking about this wonderful boy that I work with. He was very upset about something, really quite reasonably upset about something that happened to him. So I was like, let's do deep breathing. And he was like, oh, no deep breathing, please, no deep breathing. I'm like, okay, fine. And I don't know, I started making jokes about something and he started laughing. And the two of us, there's a tendency to make each other laugh a lot, and so thinking about laughter also does that beautiful thing that breathing does, because when you think about laughter, we're expanding our rib cage and we are breathing through laughter. So find people who make you laugh. It's not just like let's do deep breathing, which has value, but the laughter helps too. And the community, look at this community that you've created here through this ethnography project is really quite astounding. One thing I want to tell you is a project that I've been working on that's actually about to become available, open access. It's with the Guggenheim Museum, their educational group. It's called Guggenheim for All. And what we've done is created this sensory toolkit that's going to be open access on the Guggenheim website. And it's basically things that cultural institutions can do to make their facilities sensory friendly, specifically autism friendly. So I wanted to tell you all about that. So you can go to, if there's a place you want to go to, cultural center, that can be a zoo, it can be a museum or whatever, that there's going to be that resource that you can start to share. I think the more stuff online, the better. Yeah.
Would you be willing to put that link on our Facebook, our shared Facebook ethnography space?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How about if I wait until it's actually available?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Well, I certainly appreciate all of the efforts you've put forth, Lindsey, to be an advocate and an ambassador. I mean, I've rarely met anybody who so legitimately had one foot in each world and did so much translating. I mean, that's really important. And I agree with you that we need each other wherever we are in life to make that happen for each other. So yeah, that's one of the points of the ethnography, is to bring that kind of really nuanced understanding to a broader audience, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're good. I think we're good. I mean, I could speak for another 10 hours, but it's time to sign off. So
Well, we'll definitely have you come back. You're just a wealth of resources and knowledge, so very much appreciated. Please do go to the Facebook page, ethnography page, and share with each other, and let's have some good conversations. All right, well, I'll see you all next week, and great to have you here, Lindsey. Thanks so much.
my pleasure. It's an honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Okay, until next week, everyone.